Everyone turned away from the billionaire's silent son, until a broke waitress dared to speak his language. The moment she signed one word, his eyes lit up, and his father's stare turned deadly. What secret did she just uncover? The ballroom of Thompson Tower stretched across the entire 52nd floor, a cathedral of glass and ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Manhattan's skyline, like a painting hung by a god with expensive taste. Outside, the city glittered. Inside, so did everything else. Elena Dominic had been a server at marquee events for 8 months. She'd worked at galas before, but this was different. This was important. The Ashford Charity Foundation's annual Medical Innovation Gala, which meant billionaires, tech moguls, and people whose names Elena had only read in headlines she couldn't afford to care about. She gripped the silver tray until her knuckles turned the same shade as the champagne flutes arranged across it. 28 glasses. 28 identical glasses. The other servers had been working here for years. Some could balance 3 trays and navigate conversations about crypto in the same breath. Elena could barely keep her breathing steady. "Move!" snapped Marcus, another server, bumping past her shoulder. His jacket was pristine. His confidence was immaculate. He'd probably never trembled while carrying drinks in his life. Elena's feet ached in heels that weren't quite broken in. Her dress, black, required, rented from a shop in Queens, hung on her like borrowed armor. She'd graduated from NYU 2 years ago, with a degree in social work that had somehow led to this. Balancing champagne at 52 stories high, invisible among the glittering. The room hummed with a particular frequency. Not quite music, not quite speech. Just the white noise of power making small talk. Women in dresses that cost more than Elena's monthly rent. Men in tuxedos that fit like they'd been painted on. Everyone talking, laughing, celebrating medical research they'd never personally fund, but would certainly take credit for at their next dinner party. Elena moved between them, a ghost in black and white. This was the choreography she'd learned. Eyes down, tray level, smile without showing teeth. Don't acknowledge that you can hear them. Don't acknowledge that they can see you. You exist in the spaces between their words. She'd made it halfway across the ballroom when she first saw him. At the far end of the room, near the window, sat a small boy. 7 years old, maybe 8. He wore a tuxedo that matched his father's. She somehow knew it was his father instantly. Something in the set of their shoulders, the exact shade of their dark hair. But where the man's fit him like it had been custom tailored that morning, the boy's seemed borrowed. Too formal. Too much. The boy sat perfectly still. In a room of constant motion, of gesturing hands and animated faces, of laughter and the clink of glasses and the shuffle of expensive shoes across marble, this child was utterly, completely motionless. His small hands rested in his lap. His dark eyes, the exact same shade as his father's, stared straight ahead at nothing. At least at nothing Elena could see. Around him, people moved in a loose orbit. A woman leaned down to speak to him, her lips moving, her perfectly manicured hand reaching out to touch his shoulder. The boy didn't react, didn't turn, didn't smile. The woman's expression flickered. Confusion, maybe, or concern. Before she straightened and drifted back into the crowd, as if the boy had gently rejected her without saying a word. If you can't stand people who look down on others, hit subscribe. Elitists won't. Comment, "Every voice matters," if you'd never ignore someone just because they're different. Because he hadn't said a word. Elena realized this suddenly, the way you realize something has been true the entire time you've known it. This child hadn't made a sound since she'd been watching him, and she'd been watching him for longer than she'd meant to. "Excuse me." Elena jumped. A man in a tuxedo stood directly in front of her, his hand reaching toward her tray. His expression said he'd been waiting, probably for longer than she'd noticed. "Oh, yes, of course." Elena held the tray forward, grateful for the distraction, and immediately guilty for being grateful. The man took a glass and nodded dismissively, already turning away before she'd finished her smile. She forced her gaze back to the ballroom, back to the work, back to the rhythm of it all. But her eyes found the boy again. He was still sitting in the same spot, still in that same impossible stillness. Now his father was beside him. That had to be Nickel Thompson, the founder of Thompson Dynamics. She'd heard the name whispered when she was loading the tray in the back. Nickel Thompson, 35, a self-made billionaire. A man whose face had been on Forbes and Fortune so many times that seeing him in person felt like meeting someone you already knew. He was talking to a woman in an emerald dress, his hand gesturing as he spoke. Confident, charismatic, everything his son was not. Mr. Thompson didn't even glance at the boy beside him. The boy didn't seem to expect him to. Elena watched as another child, the daughter of someone important, ran past laughing. Her nanny chased her smiling. The little girl's joy was infectious, spreading through the room like a contagion of happiness. People watched her, charmed. The room adapted itself to her energy. Martin Thompson, Elena somehow knew the boy's name now, had heard it mentioned in passing. The Thompsons are here with their son Martin. Watched none of it. He seemed to exist in a separate room entirely, one that shared the same physical space but no other dimension. Elena delivered champagne to 6 more people. She refilled 2 glasses. She smiled at a joke she wasn't meant to understand. She became, temporarily, the servant in the room. Necessary but not acknowledged. Present but not seen. When she found herself standing near the window, near where Martin Thompson sat, she wasn't sure if it was accident or something else. The boy's hands were fidgeting in his lap now. Small, restless movements. Not quite hand-wringing, but close. His dark eyes had shifted slightly, looking at something beyond the glass. The city, maybe. The stars beyond the city. Something distant and untouchable. "Would you like anything?" Elena heard herself say. The boy didn't respond, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge that she'd spoken. Elena's face flushed. She'd broken the first rule. Never speak to the clients unless spoken to. Never presume that your words matter enough to interrupt their evening. She was turning away when she noticed something. His hands. They were moving again, but differently now. More deliberately. More intentional. Small shapes. Fingers curling and extending in patterns that meant nothing to Elena, but meant something. She could feel it in the way he formed each gesture. There was language here. There was thought. There was entire universes being expressed in the space of his small hands. Elena had a younger brother. She hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. He'd gone to live with their father in Atlanta when their mother couldn't afford to keep him in New York. But muscle memory, sibling memory, lived in her body. She knew what it looked like when someone was trying to communicate and the world wouldn't listen. Her brother had been born deaf. She was 4 when she realized this. 7 when her mother enrolled them both in a community center class. 12 when she realized that learning to sign meant her brother was less alone. Now, watching this small boy in his borrowed tuxedo form shapes with his hands, Elena's breath caught. She couldn't read what he was signing. That skill had atrophied in the years since she'd left for college, since her brother had left for Atlanta. But she could read the shape of it, the need behind it, the desperate, careful hope that maybe, this time, someone would understand. Elena set down her tray. She didn't think about what she was doing, didn't calculate the risk or consider the consequences. She simply let her hands move, muscle memory surfacing from somewhere deep in her body. She formed the sign for you. Just that. Just a question posed in the language of hands. She formed the sign for okay. Another question. Martin Thompson's head snapped around so fast she thought he might have hurt his neck. His eyes met hers, and they weren't empty anymore. They were lightning in a bottle. Like if you'd never pretend someone doesn't exist. Subscribe if you stand against arrogance and silence. They were someone who'd been waiting their entire life for someone to understand, and suddenly, against all possibility, someone did. His small hands flew up from his lap. "You know," he signed, his fingers moving so quickly they blurred together. You know how to talk. His hands moved faster, questions tumbling over each other. Do you know a lot? What's your name? Are you new? Where did you learn? His face was transformed, suddenly alive, suddenly present in a way it hadn't been just moments before. Elena's own hands moved in response, rusty but clear. Hi, my name is Elena. What's yours? Martin, he signed, his whole body vibrating with excitement. I'm Martin. No one talks like this. Just my teacher. My teacher's the only one who... Martin. A voice cut through the moment like a knife through silk. It was Mr. Thompson, Nicol Thompson. His expression was unreadable, but Elena felt something shift in the room's temperature. She straightened, suddenly aware that she was a server in a rented dress who'd just initiated contact with a billionaire's child, suddenly aware of every way this could be wrong. Martin's hands dropped, his face closed off like a door slamming shut. That alive expression, that lightning, dimmed back to something more careful, more guarded. Apologies, sir, Elena said quickly, picking up her tray. I was just... You, Nicol Thompson said quietly. What's your name? Elena's heart hammered. Elena Dominic, sir. His gaze held hers for a moment longer than felt comfortable. His expression, was it anger? Suspicion? Something more complicated? Didn't change. Finish your shift, he said finally. Then come find me in my office. Suite C, 54th floor. He returned to his conversation as if the moment had never happened, as if his son hadn't just experienced something close to joy, and Elena hadn't been the one to offer it. Martin looked at Elena one final time, his young face carefully blank. Then he turned back to the window, back to watching the city, back to the silence that surrounded him like glass. Elena's hands trembled as she gripped her tray. Everything had just changed. She could feel it, the way the air had shifted, the way Mr. Thompson had looked at her, not with anger exactly, but with something that felt heavier, something that felt like the beginning of something she didn't have the language yet to understand. Around her, the party continued. The glittering ballroom hummed with its same white noise. Champagne flutes clinked. People laughed at jokes. The city sparkled beyond the windows. But Elena could think of nothing except a small boy's hands forming words in the shape of connection, and a billionaire's question hanging in the air like a threat or a promise. Or maybe both. She would find out soon enough. The elevator climbed. 54 floors of metal and glass and Elena's thundering heartbeat. She'd finished her shift in a daze, delivered the remaining champagne, cleared the fallen glasses, smiled at the caterer who'd complimented her efficiency. All of it happened through a kind of fog. Her mind was 3 floors above the ballroom, in an office she'd never seen, waiting for a meeting she didn't understand. The other servers had noticed her distraction. Marcus had made a joke about her being starstruck. The older woman, Rosa, had pulled her aside and asked if everything was okay. Elena had lied and said yes, fine, just tired. But her hands had been trembling as she untied her apron. Now, in the elevator, she checked her reflection in the polished steel doors. Black dress, still immaculate. Hair still pinned back. She looked like a servant. She was a servant. What was she doing riding in a private elevator to the 54th floor? The doors opened to silence. Suite C wasn't a hallway. It was an entrance. A foyer with a single minimalist desk, artwork that probably cost more than Elena's entire apartment, and a view of the city so vast and perfect it looked like someone had commissioned God to paint it. Behind the desk, a woman with silver hair and reading glasses looked up. "He's expecting you," she said, gesturing toward a door of dark wood that looked older than the building itself. "Go through." Elena's mouth was dry. She could taste fear like copper on her tongue. The office was even larger than she expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides. A desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of obsidian. Books everywhere, hundreds of them, stacked on shelves, arranged in neat piles on the carpet. And behind the desk, waiting with the kind of patience that came from always getting what he wanted. Nicol Thompson. He wasn't wearing his tuxedo anymore. Just a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, the top few buttons undone. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man who'd been working all day and had somehow found a way to work through a charity gala and keep working still. "Elena Dominic," he said, standing. He didn't come around the desk. "I looked up your employee file. 8 months at Marquis. Before that, social work graduate from NYU. Before that, grew up in the Bronx. Your file says you specialized in underserved communities. Children's advocacy." Elena's hands clenched at her sides. "How did you—" "I have people who research things for me. It's a hobby." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit, please." She sat. The chair was expensive in the way that expensive chairs are, uncomfortable because they were clearly designed by someone who'd never sat in a chair in their life, all form and no function. "My son is mute," Nicol said, sitting back down. No preamble, no emotional hedging, just fact, delivered like a date or a statistic. "He was born this way. We've had him tested, treated, seen every specialist in 3 states. The medical consensus is that there's nothing physically wrong with him. He simply cannot produce speech. Additionally, he's partially deaf, some hearing in one ear, but not enough for standard communication to be functional." Elena listened. She'd known some of this already, but hearing it stated so plainly, so clinically, was different. "He's been in speech therapy for 3 years, occupational therapy for 4. His current tutor, a woman named Patricia, she learned sign language specifically for him. It's the only language he's fluent in. She comes 5 days a week, spends 3 hours with him, and it's the only time during those hours when he becomes animated, present, like a child, rather than a ghost sitting in a room." Nicol leaned back in his chair. "Tonight, I watched my son come alive in front of a stranger. In front of you. Within approximately 30 seconds, you accomplished what his therapists haven't been able to accomplish in years." Elena's mouth opened and closed. She had no idea what to say. "My question for you is simple," Nicol continued. "Why?" "Because," Elena swallowed. "Because he was trying to communicate, and everyone around him was pretending he wasn't." The office was very quiet. "You learned sign language from your brother?" Nicol asked. Elena nodded slowly. "How do you know that?" "I told you. I have people. Your brother James, born deaf. You learned sign language when you were 4. Took a class at a community center when you were 7. You were quite good, apparently. The instructor wrote a recommendation letter for you when you applied to NYU, mentioned your natural aptitude for the language." Elena felt suddenly acutely aware of how small she was in this office. How exposed. This man had taken her life apart and reviewed it like a document. "I haven't spoken to him in 3 years," she said quietly. "I chose social work. I was going to help children. That's not what happened." "No," Nicol agreed. "Instead, you became a server at high-end events. You live in a studio apartment in Astoria that you share with 2 other people. You work 3 jobs, all low-wage service positions, and still struggle to pay your student loans. Your mother is alive, but they don't speak. Your brother is thriving in Atlanta with your father, and you see him once a year, if that." Each statement landed like a small stone. Elena felt them accumulating in her chest. "Why am I telling you this?" Nicol asked, though he wasn't asking Elena. He was telling her. "Because I want you to understand what I'm about to propose from a position of complete information. I need you to know exactly what you're getting into." He stood and walked to the window. Manhattan spread out below him like a kingdom. He'd probably walked past this window 1,000 times without seeing it anymore. Wealth had a way of making the extraordinary mundane. "Martin doesn't have friends," he said quietly. "He's been to 4 different schools. In each one, other children either mocked him or ignored him. Parents complained that he was disruptive. Teachers couldn't teach a child who wouldn't respond, who couldn't participate in normal classroom activities. So we tried private school, then homeschooling with tutors. Nothing changed the essential fact: my son is alone. He turned back to face Elena. His mother would have known what to do with this. She would have. He stopped, his jaw tightening. She died when he was 3. Car accident. She was the warm one. The person who knew how to make connections. I'm good at closing deals and building companies. I'm not good at people. Elena felt something shift in her chest. This powerful man, this billionaire, was admitting to failure, to loneliness, to love expressed through the only currency he knew: hiring people, researching them, trying to solve human problems with money and information. I want to hire you, Nicole said simply. As Martin's companion, not a therapist, not a tutor, not another professional doing their job. I want you to spend time with him. Help him do the things children are supposed to do. And yes, help him with sign language, because clearly that's something you can do that no one else here can. I'm a server, Elena said. I have no training in... I'm offering you $200,000 a year, Nicole interrupted, plus benefits, housing, everything. You move into our penthouse. You work with Martin 6 days a week, 6 hours a day. The rest of the time is yours. In exchange, you bring my son back from wherever he's been living in his own mind. Elena stared at him. That's insane, she said finally. Probably, Nicole agreed. But you're the first person I've ever seen reach him. The first person who saw him as a person worth communicating with, rather than as a problem to be managed. One conversation doesn't mean I can... I know, Nicole interrupted. Which is why I'm asking, not commanding. If you walk out that door right now, I won't hold it against you. You've already given me something valuable. Proof that it's possible to reach him. That might be enough. I could hire a professional sign language expert, someone with degrees and credentials. But I think what Martin needs isn't another professional. He needs someone who sees him as more than his disability. Elena's mind raced. $200,000, that was insane. That was life-changing. That was too much. That was not enough. If I say yes, she said slowly, I'd be taking a job based on one interaction. Yes. With your 7-year-old son. A child I don't know. Yes. And you'd be paying me more money than I've made in my entire life to do it. Yes, Nicole said, because my son was alive for 30 seconds in front of you tonight, and I watched it happen. I watched him stop being invisible. I watched him want something, and I'll pay quite a lot for the possibility of that happening again. Elena thought of her student loans, of her roommates, of her tiny studio apartment and her 3 jobs and the social work degree gathering dust on a shelf because the world needed servers more than it needed advocates for vulnerable children. She thought of her brother, thousands of miles away. She thought of Martin Thompson, the billionaire's silent son, trapped in a room surrounded by people who couldn't hear him. I'll need to think about it, she said. Nicole nodded. He reached into his desk and pulled out a business card. My personal number. Call me. Day or night. I know this is unusual. Elena took the card. It was heavy stock, embossed letters, a phone number, and an email, and nothing else. Minimalist, like everything in this office. There's one more thing, Nicole said as she stood to leave. When I watched Martin with you, I didn't just see him light up. I watched him worry that you'd leave. He's been left before, Elena. Everyone leaves eventually. Even people paid to stay have a way of finding the exit when things get complicated. Elena understood what he was really asking. Are you the type of person who leaves? My brother, she said carefully. He's the last person who really needed me. And I left him anyway. I'm not proud of that. Then you know what it's like to be on both sides of that, Nicole said quietly. You know what it costs. Elena left the office with the business card burning in her pocket like a coal. Elena didn't call for 3 days. She went to her jobs. She served champagne at a wedding in Brooklyn. She worked the line at a bistro in Manhattan. She stocked shelves at a department store on Fifth Avenue where customers rarely looked her in the eye. She saved the leftover fruit from the wedding, the rolls from the bistro, She lived the life she'd been living for 3 years. Small, efficient, invisible. But she kept the business card on her nightstand. She'd look at it before sleep, after work, during her brief moments of stillness. $200,000. Her roommate Keisha found her staring at it one morning. "What is that?" Keisha asked, holding it up to the light. "This is real cardstock. This is expensive cardstock." "Who gives you expensive cardstock?" "A potential employer," Elena said. "Potential employer doing what? Drug dealing?" "Is this a drug dealing opportunity?" "Because I'm not judging, but I want to know what we're working with." Elena told her everything. Keisha listened, sitting on the edge of Elena's twin bed, and when Elena finished, Keisha was quiet for a long moment. "You're going to say no," Keisha said finally. "How do you know?" "Because you're scared. And when you're scared of something good, you disappear into the bad things that are familiar." Keisha took Elena's hand. "You left your brother with your dad and never went back. You got your degree in social work and took a job waiting tables. You do this thing where you push away the people who matter and then you make your life very small so there's less room for them to leave." Elena wanted to argue, but Keisha was her best friend, which meant she knew where all of Elena's cracks were. "What if I'm not good with him?" Elena said. "What if I take the job and I fail?" "What if you do?" Keisha replied. "At least you tried. That's more than you can say about your brother." The words stung. They were meant to. Elena called the number on the 4th day. Nikol answered on the 2nd ring, as if he'd been waiting with the phone in his hand. "Yes," Elena said. "I'll take the job." The silence on the other end was very long. "Thank you," Nikol said finally, and he sounded relieved in a way that made Elena understand something had been at stake for him too. The Thompson penthouse was on the 75th floor. Of course it was. Height seemed to matter to people with money, as if proximity to the sky proved something about their importance. Elena's room was smaller than the kitchen she'd lived in for the past 3 years. It was also beautiful in a way that made her uncomfortable. Fresh flowers on the nightstand, blackout curtains, a bed so soft it felt like sleeping on a cloud that someone had decided had legal rights. She stood in the doorway and couldn't make herself step inside. "It's okay," a voice said behind her. "I was scared the first time too." Elena turned to see an older woman with kind eyes and tired hands. The housekeeper, Patricia, had introduced them in the kitchen. Her name was Margaret. She'd worked for the Thompsons for 11 years. "Scared of what?" Elena asked. "The room?" "Scared of staying," Margaret said. "Most people who come here don't stay. The money's not worth the complicated. But some people are built to stay." Margaret left Elena alone after that, but the words stayed with her. Elena's first morning with Martin was scheduled for 9 a.m. She woke at 5 and couldn't fall back asleep. She'd prepared lesson plans, written down signs she'd relearned through late-night YouTube videos, thought through conversation starters. All of it felt inadequate. All of it felt like a script for a play she didn't know how to act in. At 8:45, she made her way to Martin's room. The door was closed. Elena knocked. Nothing. She knocked again. Still nothing. She was about to leave when the door swung open and Martin stood there in pajamas, his small face suspicious. "Hi," Elena signed. "Ready for breakfast?" Martin's expression didn't change, but he stepped back slightly, allowing her to enter his room. His space was immaculate. Toys arranged by color. Books organized by size. Nothing on the walls. The room of a child being maintained, not lived in. "Come on," Elena signed. "Let's go to the kitchen." They walked in silence. Margaret had prepared pancakes, cut into perfect triangles. Martin sat at the breakfast table and ate methodically, not looking at Elena. "My brother," Elena signed slowly. She had to be careful with her vocabulary, make sure everything was clear. "When I was little, I learned to sign, so we could talk." Martin didn't look up from his food. "I stopped signing. When I got older, I was embarrassed." Elena stopped, choosing her words carefully. That was a mistake. I'm sorry I'm not better at this yet. But I'm going to try, okay? Martin's eyes flicked to her for just a moment. It was something. After breakfast, Elena signed, we can do whatever you want. Martin finished his pancakes. Then he stood and signed, so quickly she almost missed it. Library? Sure, Elena signed. Library. The Thompson Library made the one at NYU look like someone's personal collection. Floor after floor. No, they didn't have floors. They had sections, each one dedicated to a different topic. Martin navigated it like he owned it, which perhaps in his way he did. He pulled a picture book from a shelf. Beautiful illustrations, no words. A story about a child who couldn't speak, and a forest that listened anyway. You like this one? Elena signed. Martin's small hands moved. Teacher reads. I like the pictures. They sat together on the floor, and Elena looked at the pictures with him. She didn't try to tell the story. She didn't try to make it about anything. She just sat with a small boy in a library and looked at pictures of a child who was quiet in a forest that cared anyway. After an hour, Martin's eyes grew heavy. Nap time? Elena signed. Martin nodded. They walked back to his room. He climbed into bed and Elena smoothed the blanket over him. As she was leaving, he signed one word. Stay. Elena turned back. Stay. He signed again. Please. Bad dreams. You stay? Elena felt something crack open in her chest. This small, beautiful child who'd been alone for so long that he didn't even expect kindness to remain. Yes, Elena signed. I'll stay. She sat in the chair by his bed. Martin's eyes closed. His breathing deepened. And Elena sat in the quiet, watching him sleep, thinking about all the children who needed someone to stay with them through the dark, thinking about her brother, thinking about second chances. 3 weeks into the job, Elena was beginning to understand the shape of Martin's world. He was brilliant, profoundly, brilliantly intelligent. His tutors had said as much, but Elena was beginning to understand what that meant. He asked complicated questions. He made connections between ideas that shouldn't connect. He thought in pictures and patterns and stories. He was also, systematically, isolated. Nickel was away most days, closing deals, managing his empire. When he came home, he'd ask Patricia, the tutor, how Martin's day had been. He'd sit with his son for dinner, he'd say goodnight. It was something, but not enough, not quite. Elena was teaching Martin more signs now, not just words, but concepts. The sign for lonely, the sign for scared, the sign for loved. It was during their 4th week together that everything shifted. They were in the library, their library now, the place they went every afternoon when the city was covered in that golden light that only exists in late September. Martin was showing Elena a book about birds. He was describing with elaborate hand movements how he'd seen a sparrow outside his window that morning, how he'd wanted to say something about it but didn't know who to tell. You can tell me, Elena signed. Tell me about the sparrow. Martin's hands moved rapidly, describing the color, the way it moved, the song it sang without making sound. And Elena understood then what was happening. This child had been building entire worlds inside his head, full of observation and wonder, with absolutely no one to share them with. It was heartbreaking and miraculous in equal measure. That evening, Nickel came home early. He stood in the library doorway watching them. Elena and Martin didn't notice him at first. They were in the middle of a story Elena was making up. She was signing about a princess who couldn't speak, and how she saved her kingdom using pictures instead of words. Martin, Nickel said. The warmth in Martin's face disappeared immediately. How was school today? Nickel asked, using the tone that meant he'd been rehearsed by someone, probably Patricia, on how to ask his son questions. Martin looked at Elena. His hands moved hesitantly. Good. Elena and I went to the library. The library, Nickel repeated, looking at Elena with something she couldn't quite read in his expression. "You've been spending a lot of time there." "It's where Martin likes to be," Elena said carefully. "Martin should be doing his speech therapy, his tests, the things Patricia recommended." "With respect, sir, he's doing those things," Elena said. "But he's also just being a child. He's supposed to do both." Nico's jaw tightened. "I'm not sure you understand the scope of Martin's condition. This isn't something that—" "Dad." Martin's small hand reached out, grabbing his father's arm. His signs were urgent, quick. "Elena helps. Please don't make her leave. Please." Nico stared at his son's hands, not quite understanding all of the signs. He looked at Elena. "He's asking you not to fire me," Elena said quietly. Something flickered in Nico's expression. He knelt down to Martin's level, and Elena realized he must have been learning. He was making an effort to be closer to his son's height, to meet him halfway. "I'm not going to fire her," Nico signed slowly, the movements uncertain but deliberate. And Elena's breath caught because she understood what this meant. He was learning. He was trying. Martin threw his small arms around his father's neck. Nico looked shocked, as if his son's affection was something he hadn't quite expected to receive. His arms came up slowly, held his child. Over Martin's shoulder, his eyes met Elena's, and in them she saw something raw and desperate and grateful. After Martin went to bed, Nico found Elena in the kitchen. "You're teaching him more than sign language," Nico said. "He's teaching himself," Elena replied. "I'm just listening." "My wife was good at listening," Nico said quietly. He sat down at the kitchen table like the weight of him had become too much to bear standing. When she was alive, the house was always full of sound, laughter, music. She'd play piano. Terrible, by the way. She was absolutely horrible at piano. But she loved it, so she played anyway. Elena sat across from him. She didn't say anything. Sometimes listening was the right response. After she died, I realized Martin couldn't hear her playing anymore. Literally couldn't. And I thought if I just fixed the hearing problem, gave him the right resources, paid for the right specialists, then it would be okay. Then he wouldn't be suffering the way I was suffering. Nico looked at his hands. But he wasn't suffering from his condition. He was suffering from being alone. "He's not alone anymore," Elena said. Nico looked at her. "Don't leave," he said, and it sounded like a plea. "Whatever happens, whoever else tries to convince you to move on to something better, something more. Don't leave Martin." "I won't," Elena said. And she meant it. By Thanksgiving, Martin had transformed. He was still quiet, still non-speaking, but he was no longer invisible. He moved through the world with purpose now. He participated. He initiated. He was, in small but profound ways, becoming alive. It was Nikael who suggested the idea, an annual gala his company hosted. The Thompson Dynamics Medical Innovation Benefit. Thousands of people, major donors, board members, the entire world that had money and power. "We should bring Martin," Nico said one evening. Elena's first instinct was to say no. The noise alone would be overwhelming. "He could interpret," Nico continued. "There will be people talking about medical innovation, about hearing loss, about treatment options for deaf children. Martin should be there. He should be part of that conversation." "He's 7 years old," Elena said. "I know," Nico replied. "That's exactly why." They spent 2 weeks preparing. Elena taught Martin new signs. They practiced breathing exercises for when the crowd became overwhelming. She taught him how to identify the exits, how to recognize when he needed a break. But more than that, she taught him something else. That his voice, the voice he expressed through his hands, mattered. That there were people in the world who needed to hear what he had to say. The night of the gala, Martin wore a small tuxedo that fit him perfectly. His hair was combed. He held Elena's hand as they walked into the ballroom, this child who'd never been to one of these events because he couldn't participate in the way the world demanded. Nico introduced him to people. "This is my son, Martin. He's going to tell you about his experience living with hearing loss. And Martin's hands began to move. Elena translated, her voice steady and clear. Martin spoke about what silence felt like. He spoke about the loneliness of being in a room full of people and having no one to talk to. He spoke about learning sign language and how it had changed his world. He spoke, through Elena, about his father, about how Nicole had learned to sign so he could understand his son, about how that simple act, learning a new language, had given him his father back. The ballroom was silent, the kind of silence that contains power. My father says strong is not about speaking loud, Martin signed, Elena translating. Strong is about listening loud. Strong is learning a new way so you can understand someone you love. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Afterward, people lined up to speak to Martin. They wanted to know where he'd learned sign language. They wanted to know how to support deaf children in their lives. They wanted to know how to learn the language themselves. Nicole stood to the side, watching his son be seen. Truly, completely seen. That night, after the gala, after the excitement had faded, Nicole pulled Elena aside. "Thank you," he said, "for staying, for seeing him when I couldn't." "He was always visible," Elena said. "Everyone just refused to look." But acceptance didn't come easily. 2 days after the gala, Elena received a call. The number was blocked. When she answered, she heard a man's voice, cold and calculated. "My name is Harold Case," the voice said. "I'm the chairman of the Thompson Dynamics Board. I have some concerns about recent developments in the Thompson household that we should discuss." Elena's stomach dropped. "I'm sorry. Who?" "I'm aware you're a staff member now, but you were previously a server, a person with no professional qualifications, no background in disability services, with whom Mr. Thompson is making decisions that affect the company's public image. There have been complaints. Concerns that Mr. Thompson's focus has shifted to his personal life at the expense of business." Elena understood what was happening. She was a threat, a complication, a poor girl from the Bronx who'd somehow wormed her way into the Thompson family. And there were people in power who didn't appreciate that. "The board would prefer that you transition out of your position with the family by the end of the month. We've discussed this with Mr. Thompson. He's agreed that a professional disability specialist would be more appropriate for Martin's care." The words landed like stones. "Mr. Thompson agreed," Elena heard herself say. "He understands that your presence, while well-meaning, is complicating matters. Matters involving the future of his company, the future of his family's business. I'm sure you can appreciate the position he's in." The call ended. Elena sat in her beautiful room, her beautiful temporary room, and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. If you've ever seen good people get crushed by power, hit subscribe. The cowards who side with greed won't. She'd been here before. New situation, same ending. She was always temporary, always eventually discardable. She went to find Nicole. He was in his office at the desk that looked like it had been carved from stone. "Is it true?" she asked. "The board wants me gone?" Nicole's face went very still. "Where did you hear that?" "Harold Case called me, said the board had concerns, that you agreed." Nicole stood. He walked to the window, the same window where he'd stood the night they'd made the deal. "I told them that I would consider finding a professional. I didn't agree to fire you. But you're considering it," Elena said, and she heard how small her voice had become, how ready she was to accept this ending. "No," Nicole said, turning to face her. "I'm not. But I want to be honest with you about what you're walking into, Elena. The board thinks of Martin as a liability. They think his disability makes him unsuitable to inherit the company. They think your presence, a young woman from a poor background, no family connections teaching their heir sign language, is enabling weakness rather than encouraging strength." "I should leave," Elena said quietly. "No," Nicole said, and his voice had steel in it now. "You should stay, but I'm not going to lie to you. There will be pressure. There will be people trying to convince you that this isn't worth it. that you should move on to something better. This is everything, Elena said. This is exactly what I was supposed to be doing with my life. That's what terrifies me. Subscribe if you've ever been made to feel small. Only manipulators want you to stay silent. Comment, keep going if you'd stay, even when it hurts. Nicole moved toward her. Then be terrified. But be terrified here. With my son. With me. Something unspoken shifted in the room. Elena understood, in that moment, that this wasn't just about Martin anymore. That something more complicated had taken root between them. Elena didn't call her father. She didn't call Keisha for advice. She didn't consult anyone. Instead, she walked into Martin's room and she said, "We have a problem." Martin looked up from his drawing. "Problem?" he signed. "Some people want me to leave," Elena signed carefully. "They think I'm not good enough for you, that a different person should help you instead." Martin's small face went very serious. "You're leaving?" "No," Elena signed firmly. "I'm not. But there's going to be people who try to make it hard. And I need to know if you still want me to stay, even when it's difficult." Martin got out of his bed and hugged her, fierce and tight. "Stay," he signed fiercely. "Please stay." Elena held him, and she made a choice. Not based on money, not based on fear, not based on any of the things that had guided her decisions before. She chose because this child, this beautiful, brilliant child, needed her, and because she finally understood that sometimes staying was the bravest thing you could do. The board meeting happened 6 weeks later. Nicole presented a proposal, a new philanthropic initiative, the Thompson Foundation for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Children, funding for sign language programs in schools, scholarships for interpreters, resources for families. "My son is deaf," Nicole told the board, and Elena heard him say, "deaf," not afflicted or disabled or any of the other euphemisms. Just a fact, stated plainly. "He's also the smartest person in this company. He's taught me more about communication, about listening, about what it means to be truly present than any business school ever could." He looked directly at the camera, because it was being streamed, being shared with the world, and said, "I've been chasing success my entire life, building a company, acquiring wealth. I thought that was what mattered. But I was wrong. What matters is the people in front of you. What matters is choosing them over and over, even when the world tells you to choose something else." Elena watched from the hallway where she and Martin had been waiting. Martin's hands moved slowly, learning to read his father's words. "He's saying what I taught him?" Martin signed, confused and delighted. "He's saying he loves you," Elena signed. "He's telling everyone." When Nicole walked out of the conference room, the board had voted unanimously. The initiative would proceed. Elena would remain Martin's primary caregiver and sign language specialist, with full title and benefits. Her position was no longer temporary. It was permanent. 6 months later, the Thompson Foundation opened its first community center, located in the Bronx, in the neighborhood where Elena had grown up. It offered free sign language classes, therapy services, and community support for deaf and hard of hearing children. Elena was there on opening day. So was Martin. So was Nicole. But there was one more person there. Standing by the window, looking at the children learning to sign together, speaking to them when they had questions. James Dominic, Elena's brother. He'd come back from Atlanta when Elena had called him with an apology and an explanation and an offer to help rebuild what they'd broken. "This is amazing," James signed, his hands moving fluidly. "Did you do this?" Elena laughed, actually laughed out loud, the way she never quite had before. "We did," she signed back, looking at Nicole and Martin. "All of us." That evening, back at the penthouse, Elena found herself alone with Nicole for the first time in weeks. "I have something for you," he said, handing her an envelope. Inside was a degree program, full scholarship, a master's program in deaf education, starting in the fall. "You don't have to leave, Martin," Nicole said quickly. The program is part-time, flexible. But I was thinking, what you've done for my son, what you could do for other families like ours, that's too important to give up. That deserves formal training. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. How did you? I have people, Nikol said. And it was almost a joke now, the way he said it, the way they both understood what it meant. I see you. I'm paying attention. You matter. Thank you, Elena said. And she meant it in all the ways that words couldn't quite capture. The signing hour at the Thompson Foundation became a weekly tradition. Every Saturday afternoon, children and adults came together to learn, to communicate, to build community in a language the world hadn't taught them. Martin, now 12 years old, was one of the instructors. He taught with the confidence of someone who'd spent his entire life in rooms where he belonged. He signed with fluency and humor and connection. He was no longer invisible. Elena stood in the back of the room watching him work with a new student, a 7-year-old girl, newly deaf, who'd never met another child who understood what her silence meant. She watched Martin take the girl's hand, watched him show her how to shape her fingers, watched him demonstrate that silence wasn't emptiness, it was just a different kind of language. Like this, if you believe kindness beats arrogance, the heartless will scroll past. Comment. I believe in second chances, if you'd never side with people who turn their backs on the weak. The girl's face transformed. Understanding bloomed across her features like spring after a long winter. Elena felt a hand slip into hers. She turned to find Nikol standing beside her, watching their son teach the next generation what they'd all learned together. That being different didn't mean being less. We did good, Nikol signed to her, still learning, still practicing, the way he did every single day. We did, Elena signed back. Behind them, the classroom was full of sound and silence, both, children's voices and the beautiful poetry of hands in motion, all of it coming together to create something that hadn't existed before. Something that mattered. Something that would last. 5 years ago, Elena Dominic was a server balancing champagne glasses, convinced that her life would always be small. 5 years ago, Martin Thompson was a boy sitting alone in rooms full of people, invisible to everyone except one person who learned to see. 5 years ago, Nikol Thompson was building empires and missing the most important thing, the human being right beside him who needed him to learn a new language. One moment changed everything. One act of recognition. One person choosing to see rather than look away. But that one moment only mattered because it led to another moment, and then another. Choices, made again and again, to stay, to try, to learn, to believe that connection was possible even when the world said otherwise. Today, the Thompson Foundation serves over 3,000 deaf and hard of hearing children and their families across the United States. Today, sign language is taught in 72 schools that previously had no resources for it. Today, there are teachers and counselors and advocates who exist because one young woman decided that a child's silence was worth listening to. Nikol Thompson's most valuable investment wasn't in technology or real estate. It was in his son. It was in believing that strength comes in many forms, that communication is more important than speech, that being seen is a human necessity, not a luxury. It was in hiring a waitress from the Bronx who'd learned long ago that love is a language you have to choose to speak, over and over, every single day, until it becomes so natural you can't imagine living any other way. Elena never went back to serving champagne. She finished her master's degree. She became the director of the Thompson Foundation. She brought her brother back into her life and learned to say, out loud, the things she'd been too scared to say before. I'm sorry. I need you. I love you. And sometimes, late at night in the penthouse that had become home, she'd practice signing the phrase that had changed everything, the phrase that had set them all free. Are you okay? Such simple words. Such enormous power. Because sometimes all anyone needs is for someone to ask, and sometimes all anyone needs is for someone to stay while they answer.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.